So we have some wonderful speakers and experts to come and share their insights, especially for devotees, especially for people on spiritual path, looking ahead to see what this means, in some cases why it has happened, and what we can do to move forward in faith and confidence. So tonight, given about 5 minutes here for people to join us, tonight we have David Gamow, who's been playing with and working with and analyzing financial features of our world for about 50 years. And for the last 40 of that has been a devotee of Yogananda. So he brings an unusual and interesting combination of perspectives to our subject tonight of just how do we survive, how do we understand the crash of financial worlds that seems to be happening, although it just is not crashing now, it's also booming back up, it seems. So David, welcome, and
talk about that. Thanks.
Share with us.
Let me share just a little bit of my background at the beginning. You know, it's funny, my father was a businessman his whole life. He was a CPA, he was a tax lawyer, he was the right-hand man to a billionaire managing businesses, all of that stuff. And I was a kid, and he was in his den, and he was reading the Wall Street Journal. And I walked into his den, and I think I was like 11. And it's for me, these things are interesting about reincarnation, because we come in with our strong tendencies. And I don't think there's such a thing as a financial. So I think it was a samskar, a previous experience of mine. But I walked into his den, he was reading the Wall Street Journal, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "It's the financial newspaper." And I said, "What are all those numbers?" And he started explaining to me, and it's like I heard angel choirs. And I was just so fascinated by all of that. So my first job when I got out of college, I became a stockbroker. I've had 2 different securities licenses. I've been a stockbroker and an RIA, registered investment advisor. I've been licensed to sell real estate partnerships and insurance products. I'm a very active trader in the stock markets. And I find all of this stuff incredibly interesting. So part of me, as well as having been a disciple of Yogananda's for almost 40 years, but part of me is just impersonally really intrigued with everything that's going on, because a lot of what's going on has never happened before, actually, believe it or not, in world financial history. More of that. So what I want to do for a while is I want to just talk about where we are, how we got here. You know, it's kind of nice to have some understanding. Like when you go to the doctor and you're not feeling well, and then he tells you what you've got, you feel exactly as sick as you did 10 minutes ago, but you feel so much better because now you understand what's going on. So a little bit, I want to just explain what's going on. Let me say also, I love getting questions. Don't be shy. I don't have a thing that I need to go through, so to speak. My goal tonight is to serve you guys. So if you have a question, you're the whole reason I'm here. Feel free to ask it. I'll say, let me go a little while at the beginning to sort of set the stage for what we're talking about. And then after a little while, if you have a question, the other thing I'll mention is I like seeing the faces of the people that I'm talking to. It helps me connect a little bit. So if you don't mind, you can, well, mute is for verbal. What unsilence your audio? I don't know, your video? I don't know what the word is for that. But you can put your screen on. Oh, hey, I see Biraj is there. That's very nice. You can put your screen on. It helps me a little bit. Well, in any event, so there was that. My other work is public speaking. The last 25 years, I've been spreading Yogananda's teachings around the country in a different format. I work with government agencies and corporations and fly around. So just to share just a few minutes of my background. So let's start. One of my financial heroes, and you may know some of this and some you may not, and I'll go through as best I can. One of my financial heroes is a man by the name of Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker was the head of the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board in America, and there's a Federal Reserve Board in every major country. Germany has one, Britain has one, Japan has one. They sort of set monetary for the economy. And the reason he was a hero of mine is that back in the 80s, inflation was increasing, and that can be damaging to the economy. So he put the clamps on inflation. Now, when you put the clamps on inflation, what tends to happen is the economy contracts. People don't like that. You have a recession. So he actually caused a recession. But it turned out to be a really superb thing, because by biting the bullet early and causing that recession, he wrung inflation out of the economy completely. Then we had one of the great expansions in world history, actually. From 1983 or so into the 90s, the US economy was stellar because he bit the bullet and did that. Okay. But then, what do they say? A funny thing happened on the way to the bank. For reasons I won't bother to go into because they're not important, but both Russia, small Asian countries, Thailand, South Korea, oh, excuse me. That is my alarm reminding me I'm supposed to be here with you guys. Which obviously was a little late. Originally I thought we started at 7:30, so I'm glad I caught that. Very bad things started happening in Russia and in some of the small Asian countries, and they had a very serious decline. Now, one of the things you can do, it has been doing, one of the things you can do, hang on just one second. Yes, good point. Ramurti, as the host, can you possibly record this? Can someone hit record? Can I hit record?
It's being recorded.
The host can hit record. Wonderful. Thank you.
It's already recording. Yeah.
Thank you. Terrific. One of the things you can do if the economy is having a hard time and their financial pressures is you can cut interest rates. You can cut interest rates, reduce them from 6% to 5% to 4%, because if it's easier to borrow money, businesses tend to do better. They make more profits. The other thing that you can do, which is related, is you can push money into the economy. They're related, but they're slightly different. So in 1998, our Fed, a little bit, if I can use the phrase, and this is non-political, this is about human nature, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Well, let me talk about it a little now. Ramurti mentioned the yugas. We are in early Dwapara Yuga. So we're not at the bottom. The bottom yuga was the Dark Ages. That was pretty depressing. It was very difficult. People, if you lived to be 40 years old, it was a ripe old age, that sort of thing. So we're doing better, but we are hardly advanced. In Dwapara Yuga, people are mostly self-interested. It's lovely to help other people, but when push comes to shove, people are self-interested. And the difficulty that we're facing in the political days, again, this is not Democrats or Republicans, it's just in general, is the incentives wrong. Politicians more want to get elected. They want to get elected. They don't necessarily want to solve the problem. And if solving the problem makes them unpopular, they're torn. Okay, so back in 1998, the Fed was faced with a difficult position, and the politicians were faced with a difficult position. The Fed is supposed to be an independent organization, not affected by politics, but don't kid yourself. Okay, so the Fed was in a difficult position. Russia was blowing up, South Korea was blowing up, Thailand, it was all very difficult. And we were starting to feel it here. So the Fed very dramatically cut interest rates to try and goose the economy. It's like if you have a patient who's sick, you can shoot him full of adrenaline. It doesn't actually solve the problem, but if you stick him with enough adrenaline, he gets out of bed and he looks okay. So the Fed started shooting adrenaline in the form of lower interest rates, okay? So that all happened. What that did, though, is that money had to go somewhere. The economy did better, but it was that activity by the Fed that caused the tech bubble in the year 2000. And for people who may not be fully familiar, in the year 2000, the stock market was zooming. The high-tech stocks were going absolutely nuts. They were up 1,000%. Now, the problem with bubbles is they always pop. Bubbles always pop. It's just the nature. This is the world of duality. You know, the pendulum swings this way and then it swings this way. And the more it swings to one direction, the more it swings to the other direction. So the Fed goosed the economy. Now, what they should have done is to put money in 1998 when the problem was there and then start to withdraw it. When the patient is recovered, you don't need to keep giving them adrenaline. But human nature, because everybody was having a big party with all this loose money. And the Fed didn't want to take the punch bowl away, so to speak. Well, they left the punch bowl there too long. We had a bubble and the bubble popped. That caused a very serious recession in 2001, 2, 3. Okay? Now, the Fed doesn't like recessions. Politicians don't like recessions. So it worked really badly last time, so let's do it again. So in 2003, the Fed gave the patient even more adrenaline. If one shot worked, let's give them 6. And they cut interest rates even lower, and they put even more money into the economy. And that's what caused the housing bubble in 2007. So here we go again. Then that bubble popped, and we had a new recession. Now you'll notice that each recession was worse than the one before it, because you just keep giving the patient to sort of goose things. So 2008 was worse than 2002. 2002 was worse than 1982. Okay, so then we have the recession in 2008. Well, we can't have that. Nobody wants a recession. See, what this is like, the Forest Service learned over the years. What the US Forest Service used to do is they would suppress forest fires. Because who wants a forest fire? We don't want forest fires, right? Obvious. So every time a little fire would start, they would suppress the fire. Then they finally started to realize, hey, wait a second. If we suppress the forest fire, the cleansing process in the forest never happens. And all the little undergrowth that normally would have burnt out by that fire we put out isn't burnt out. So what they actually wound up doing was they created more and more fuel for the next fire. Does that make sense? So by not letting the little fires happen, well, that's just what the Fed has been doing. We would have had a moderately bad recession in the 90s. We had a worse recession in 2003. And they said, we can't have, and then even in a worse one in 2008, now there's so much undergrowth, I think we have a serious problem. Because now, by the time all that undergrowth has been created, now if you let the fire burn, it really. So the Fed is now caught a little bit between a rock and a hard place. People may have heard of the word derivatives. Derivatives were blamed for a lot of what happened in 2008. Okay, the derivative market. What a derivative is it's a very fancy financial contract. For example, you can write a contract for anything. You know, I have a fleet of cars. It's almost like an insurance policy. Fleet of cars. I want to protect my fleet of cars. So I create some contract. I pay you $5,000. And you promise me that if anything happens to my cars, you'll take care of it. You'll pay for all the cars. Now that's a very simple thing. It's an insurance contract. And a lot of derivatives are kind of like insurance contracts, but they're much more complicated. And they're very complicated financial instruments. Okay, what happened in 2007, and I'm going to go back a little bit. Problem is, all the incentives are wrong in our economy. You can't make a financial rule or a law that is so well crafted that it does the job you want. You can either make the law too contractive, which is going to kill the economy, or you make it too loose, which is going to let all the clever lawyers figure out a way around it. That's what happens in Dwapara Yuga. I mean, you can't make the planet. It's the story of the Mahabharata. I don't know if people know the Mahabharata, but one of the great noble figures in the Mahabharata, his name was Karna. Karna was a very sad figure. He was this wonderful, noble character, but things never quite worked for him. He was the eldest good guy in the story. They would have given him the kingdom if they'd known he was the oldest good guy, but no one knew. He had the most powerful weapon in the world. When it came time to use it, he forgot how to use it. All of these nice things, and they never quite work. That's the nature of our planet. That's what he represents. So you can't, I don't really even blame the politicians to some extent. There is no way to get this world right. That's why we're devotees. That's why we're trying to get out. You just can't make the laws precise enough to be just perfect. Okay, so all the incentives in the financial world are wrong. For example, suppose I'm an executive at a big bank and I want to write a derivatives contract. And I know that derivatives contract has a small risk. Let me explain how this works. I have a friend of mine, an acquaintance really, in New York, and he is an executive compensation lawyer. So he works for these giant companies and he writes these $1 million compensation payment packages for these super high executives. And I said to him, Jed, let me ask you, this is what it looks like to me. What do you think of this? Suppose I offered you a bet. And I said to you, here's the bet. You're going to flip coins in groups of 8. So you have to flip the coin 8 times. If you flip anything other than 8 heads or 8 tails, I give you $1 million. If you flip 8 heads or tails in a row, your company goes bankrupt. What do you do? It's pretty tempting to get that $1 million a shot. And what's the chance of flipping 8 heads in a row? Well, that's the position these executives are in. They write all of these derivative contracts. Every time they write one, they get a cash bonus. And even all the way down the chain in these companies, the little guy sitting at a desk in the bank, he gets a little bonus every time he gets a new client. So all the incentives are wrong. So these guys write all these contracts, and every once in a horrible recession, and they all go broke. And then all the taxpayers bail out the banks. So the incentives are kind of screwbally. And that's what happened. Now, here's the bad news. We had a very high level of derivatives in 2007. And that's what caused a lot of the problem, okay? Was all this stuff. We're there again. The level of derivatives is now equal to what it was in 2007. This is not good. Now, let me works. This stuff is done by leverage. If you own $1 million house with a $900,000 mortgage, your equity in that house is $100,000. $900,000 is borrowed. Your piece is $100,000. If the house drops 10% in value, you personally lose everything. You still owe the bank $900,000. Your $100,000 is gone. That's 10-to-1 leverage. So it's a little bit risky. The bigger the leverage, the more risky it is. If you put up $500,000, it's 2-to-1. It's not so bad. 10-to-1. There are $12 trillion of written derivatives in the world right now. $12 trillion. That's enormous. Those $12 trillion are controlling $650 trillion of derivatives. 53-to-1. What could go wrong? Okay, this is crazy. But again, all the bankers are getting this. Okay, so this is why the Fed in our country, this is in part why the Fed in our country has taken such an aggressive stand to pumping up the economy. We brought interest rates to the lowest level in history. We just printed $3 trillion and gave it to businesses all around the country. They're trying to prevent that forest fire. So that's basically where we are now. Everything is extremely fragile. Now it becomes very difficult to tell as we get more precise. What should I personally do? What's going to happen in the next 6 months? It's very difficult to say. There are 2 major forces right now that are battling it out. One is that deflationary force. When assets are destroyed, money, a cute way to put it, money goes to money heaven. It just sort of disappears. You know, if I had a Picasso painting, I have a Picasso painting, okay? And it's worth $5 million. I can go out and I can borrow a few $100,000 against that painting. And everybody's cool with that. I mean, why not? I got a $5 million painting. What's a few $100,000? But suppose next week, that money, you lent me a few $100,000 because I pledged the painting to you. Suppose next week, you find out that it's not a Picasso, it's a Pashmaso painting. It was his cousin who was a lousy painter. Well, it's not worth $5 million anymore. And now I would think you would be incredibly nervous about your loan to me, right? Your loan is secured by the full faith and credit of a Pashmaso painting. This is not very helpful. The whole world is discovering this at the same time. There are all these assets floating around that people were thinking were worth a lot that kind of maybe aren't because half the planet's now gone. Everything is a mess. So nobody really knows the value of anything, and everybody's getting nervous. So the Fed is printing all this money, but the money needs to move. If they print it and everybody takes it and puts it in their mattress, it doesn't actually help the economy. Too much detail. I'm trying to give you a flavor of what's going on. And some people know more about finances than others. I won't go much longer. Then I'm going to stop and we can chat and answer questions and all of that. One of the key factors in an economy is the velocity of money. As the money moves around, if I have $1 in my hand and it moves around fast enough, I spend it on Ramorti's thing, he then spends it on someone else's thing, and they spend it on someone else's. It's $1, but it's moving fast enough, it's like 6. Okay? It's not the individual piece of paper, it's the velocity. The velocity of money in the United States, I believe, just hit an all-time low. So the Fed keeps printing money and everybody is taking it and putting it in their mattress. Because everything is so fragile. Do you want to invest it in a business right now? I don't. Who the heck knows? This is one of the reasons why the stock market is zooming. The stock market is zooming because the Fed has printed trillions of dollars to go someplace. The Venezuela economy right now is near total collapse. And their stock market just hit an all-time high. The idea that the stock market has to reflect the economy is a mistake. Over the long term, generally speaking, it does. One other little piece I want to introduce to this. Money used to be linked to something. Money used to be linked to. Now, there are serious drawbacks to linking money to gold. So I'm not saying we should go back to that. I'm not saying that at all, but it's just a fact. Money used to be linked to gold. So you couldn't create more money and print more money unless you had the gold to back it up, because money was exchangeable for gold. You could go into any bank, give them your dollars, and they would give you the appropriate amount of gold. Okay? That's gone. President Nixon got rid of that in the 70s. Now, there are good reasons for that. There are also some bad reasons, but whatever, it doesn't matter. The fact is, right now, no currency in the world is backed by anything. That's not necessarily bad, but what it does is it allows these governments to just print money. Now, the US is in an advantageous position because we have the world's dominant currency. We have the world's reserve currency. We will never have deflation in this country, deflation like in the 20s, when the price of goods was constantly going down. You know, a car cost $50, and it cost whatever, $200, then it cost $100. There was deflation because everybody was broke and everyone was selling things. We'll never have deflation in this country because all they have to do is print money. It's untethered to gold, and it's the world reserve currency. If the US government owes people money, they'll never default. They'll just print it. I owe you $1 million? Here's your $1 million. You're all going to get your Social Security. Don't worry. They'll just print it. It might not be worth anything. If a loaf of bread costs $800,000, it won't help you much, but you will get your check. Do you see the difference? So right now, the whole world, it's called fiat, F-I-A-T, fiat currency. The whole world is in fiat currency right now. Never happened before. And all of the banks are in. If Chase Manhattan goes broke, the Bank of England goes broke. If the Bank of England goes broke, the Bank of Japan goes broke. If the Bank of Japan goes broke, the Bundesbank in Germany goes broke. They're all interconnected. What used to happen when we didn't have such globalization of currency, there was a horrible, I've got charts going back to 1500 in Britain. You know, I live this stuff. I love these old things. What happened hundreds of years ago, France went broke. Just France. So all of their goods and services became very cheap. If you wanted to buy something from France, everything was 80% off. So the whole world started buying stuff from France and they recovered. Britain was buying stuff from France. Spain was buying stuff from France. Now the problem is we're all connected. If France goes bad, the US will go bad and Britain will go bad and Germany. So who's going to buy from who? Unless Martians show up and want to import from us, we're going to have a serious problem. So this is the first time in the history of the world we've had globalization of banks and every currency is fiat. Now, the difficulty for me is a lot of my financial analysis work over the decades has been, well, when this happened in 1820 and then it happened in 1911, what was the result? And I could look back and I could see and I could know what's going on. But what's happening today has never happened before. If you've been a physicist your whole life, you've done nothing, you've conducted your experiments, you're the best there is. And I walk up to you, you're just about to conduct a very sensitive experiment. And I say, go ahead, do your experiment. But just for you to know, 5 minutes ago, I changed the coefficient of gravity. Now go ahead, do your experiment. You have no idea what's going on. If I just go in and change some of the laws of physics, how are you supposed to predict what's going to happen? I just made it so that water now runs uphill. Go ahead and do your maritime experiments. You don't know anything. And that's a little bit the position I find myself in. Now, what I can say is we have these two enormous forces happening. There's been a tremendous amount of wealth destruction. Businesses, all of that, the whole hotel industry, airlines, all of that is wealth destruction. That's deflationary. All those people have a lot less money. And there's an enormous push the other direction, inflationary, printing money, lowering interest rates to nothing. Everyone a $1,200 stimulus check, creating all these trillions of dollars of government programs. So we've got these two giant forces, one pushing one way, one pushing the other. Which one is going to win? I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. My long-term predictions now are 24 hours. Now, forgive me, that may not be as helpful as you'd like, but I'm playing every day by ear because this is just so complicated. Who knows what they're going to do? This has never happened before. Every day I'm reading everything and trying to figure it out. I'm hoping I can sniff it out. That's basically where we're at. Now, I want to pause now and I want to ask, excuse me, just one moment. I want to ask now for just questions and thoughts. Does this make sense? Sort of how we doing? Is this too complicated or question specific?
I have a question.
Yeah, please, Chris.
Yeah, I heard, I think it was yesterday, that the U.S. entered a recession in February.
Okay.
Did you hear anything about that?
Yes. These terms are funny. People like to define these things. Like they say, we just entered a bear market because stocks dropped 20%. Okay, so at 19% it wasn't a bear market, and at 21% it was. What difference does it make? Technically speaking, a recession is 2 negative quarters of GDP. But, so therefore what? What does that tell you? It's just a word they can apply to things. A stock market correction is said to be 10%. So at 9.8%, it's not in a correction. And at 10.1%, it is in a correction. And knowing that helps you how? Doesn't mean anything. So yes.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't mean anything. What I can tell you is the economy is doing lousy.
Okay.
That's my technical term, is lousy. What else do you need to know? Is that fair? Does that sort of make sense?
I mean, I just thought it was interesting that they said this happened in February, and considering the whole shutdown didn't start happening till mid-March.
Well, because sales were really dropping seriously before. I mean, it's not like, oh, this is a very good point. Having a lot of debt in an economy, I won't go into the details, it's a little complicated. Trust, I be careful. If I don't know something, I'll make it clear by the words I use that, this is what I think. If I say something definitively, it's true. Not because I'm so smart, but because I'm very careful. I won't put it out unless I'm sure. Having a lot of debt is deflationary. Having a lot of debt in an economy dampens growth. One way to think about it is the balloon has been filled up with so much air with all that debt, how much more can you blow it up? Is one way to look at it. Once you let the air out, then you can blow it up. The US economy had a ton of debt before COVID. You'll notice not only has each recession been worse than the one before, but every recovery after the recession has been weaker than the one before. The recovery we had from 2008 to last year was the weakest recovery in modern US financial history because we had too much debt. The Fed never allowed the undergrowth to burn. If they'd allowed it to burn, a lot of companies would have gone broke, which is sad. But then we could have started rebuilding. But in preventing that, all of the very weak companies survived, and they're still weak. Nothing changed. So the economy was very weak even last year before COVID. COVID was sort of just the icing on the cake. So I was expecting a recession this year anyway. And then this hit, and it's like, okay, well, the room was already filled with gunpowder. At some point in here was going to drop a match. It happened to be a virus, but something else would have done it. So that's sort of, where I think that's at.
There's some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, it looks like Narayan
Let me
posted a
read.
question.
Yeah, let me read them to you.
No, I've got it here, if that's okay.
Sure,
Should
go
we
right
read
ahead.
it so everyone can hear it, I guess?
Yes, that helps.
Okay.
One of the trends we hear about Dwapara Yuga is a return to simplicity and decentralization. Swami Kriyananda emphasized this in his leadership in the Ananda communities. Do you think central banks will become a thing of the past? Will cryptocurrencies bring decentralization to the world of finances?
Good question. I'll take it in two parts because there's really a few different questions in there. What tends to happen is when you're on the cusps of two yugas, you get very serious. And I think that's what's starting to happen now. Because the old guard doesn't want to let go. Do you know that in Britain, when the loom was invented to make clothing, people would go out, the people who made clothing by hand would go out at night, break into factories and burn looms. Because they said these looms are from the devil and they're going to destroy our society. Cloth making and clothing important. Well, it wasn't really. It was just that if you've spent your whole life making clothing, you were not very happy about this invention. How open to the invention of gunpowder do you think the arrow maker for the king was? He hated gunpowder. Gunpowder was the enemy. So every time you have a new thing that's happening, the old guard is very upset. So we'll answer this question in several ways. One is, in terms of it is entirely possible. Generally speaking, Yogananda felt the same way. I'm not in favor of giving a lot of power to government entities. Because as long as the government entities put themselves first, power gets abused. So this is a problem. One could argue that the Fed should be abolished, let the free market determine interest rates. If a lot of people want money, interest rates go up. If no one wants money, it's like supply and demand. If everybody wants a certain car, the price goes up. If nobody wants that car, the price goes down. Let interest rates do that. I don't know how that's going to happen. We'll see what happens. But because we're on the cusp right now from Kali Yuga to Dwapara Yuga, there's a lot of change that needs to happen. A lot of that change is going to be fought, and it's going to create a lot of dislocation. In terms of cryptocurrencies, I think we're nowhere near that. Because a currency, some level of stability. Bitcoin, which is the biggest cryptocurrency, can fluctuate 10 to 15% in a day. Imagine, that's crazy. If you had $1 in your wallet and 1 minute it was worth $1 and 10 minutes later it was worth 80 cents, I wouldn't want dollars. That's not a currency, that's a gamble. Now, at some point in the future, maybe the cryptocurrencies will take over, but we're nowhere near that yet. There's a lot of in between here and there. Because if your currency is wildly unstable, you don't want it. You want to know your dollar is worth mostly close to $1. Okay. So let me just glance at that question. I think that's mostly, will central banks become a thing of the past? Possibly. Again, I'm hoping I'll know what's going to happen a week from now. What happens after all of this blows up and settles down again is hard to say. I think that's a realistic possibility, but hard to tell. Ramurti, work. If I read the question, I can answer it in a way that everyone will be clear. Or they're pretty short. Maybe you should read them. Maybe you're muted, Ramurti, I think.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, Ramurti, if you want to read it, that's fine, but you need to unmute yourself.
Why don't you go ahead and read them? That's a good idea. You can
Okay,
break them
I can
up.
do that. I can shorten them, and I know what I'm going to answer, so that'll work. I heard that the dollar will soon not be the primary currency, that some countries do the petrodollar as primary currency. Is that true? Well, If you have the primary currency, it's called the reserve currency, the world reserve currency. You kind of like that because it gives you a lot of flexibility. As I said, the US can print as many dollars as it wants because we're the world reserve currency. In the history of the world reserve currency has always been the country with the strongest military. That's the US. So China, the yuan to be the world reserve currency, I don't think it's going to happen. Again, will it happen 50 years from now? I don't know. I'll be dead. I don't know. Okay. But it's not likely to happen in the short term. One, because the US has a stronger military. And second, because the Chinese economy is too controlled. It's a dictatorship. And you kind of want, I mean, the US is messed up in its own way, but it's a lot better, stronger financially than China is. So China is definitely growing. Will they take over someday? I don't know. But for the time being, I think that's extremely unlikely. Very, very unlikely. You can never say never with this sort of thing, but it's pretty close to never as long as the US has the strongest military and has an open economy. The Chinese are pushing to have a more open economy, but they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They kind of want to have a free market and a dictatorship, and I'm not sure how you marry those two. So it's a little bit tricky there. Let's see, another question. What will happen when the dollar is no longer backed by black gold, by oil? The dollar is not backed by black gold. It isn't. The dollar is backed by nothing. So what will happen is just what's happening today. The dollar is the currency used to denominate oil. If you want to buy oil, you have to buy it in dollars. So if you have yen, you have to buy dollars with your yen and then buy oil with it. But the dollar is not really backed by gold. It's by oil. It's related. I don't think that's a big deal personally. Oil is becoming less and less and less of a factor in the world in U.S. economy. One of the reasons oil has dropped so much in price. It used to be some percentage of the economy in the world, and now it's much, much less. Alternative energies and all of that. Let's see, the next question. Swami Kriyananda was very concerned about public debt. So printing 3 trillion is very risky regarding currency. Yes, that's just true. So, we don't know what's going to happen. I spoke before about the 2 pushes. There's the printing trillions of dollars, which would tend to cause massive inflation. But there's trillions of dollars that died and went to money heaven in the last 3 months. So, which force is going to win? I don't know. The Fed is doing everything they can. They hate deflation. People always fight the last war. The last war was the Depression in 1929. We are not going to let that happen. So they fight the last war by printing trillions of dollars, which the Fed didn't do that time. Who's going to win that battle? Deflation or inflation? I don't know. Probably inflation. So probably that's true. Probably gold will be good. I expect it will be because that's a hedge against inflation. But as I said, long term for me now is 24 hours. So I can't go too far. Let's see the next question. Black gold is oil. I'm aware Henry Kissinger made sure the money was backed by oil. Henry Kissinger made sure that the dollar was related to oil. That is true, but Henry Kissinger was a long time ago. I think it is simply not the factor that it used to be. I would forget about oil. It's not. I don't mean oil's not important. We may have a war in the Middle East. I'm not saying that. But in terms of what's going on financially, it's kind of like the patient has cancer and a hangnail. Oil's the hangnail. Nails are not great. I'm not denying that, but I don't think that that's really the focus right now. It's relevant, but not such a big deal. One way that the price of oil is relevant, there's something called junk bonds. Junk bonds are bonds of very low quality. If you lend money to IBM and IBM writes you a contract, that contract is a bond. You've lent money to IBM and they agreed to pay you. You're in pretty good shape. If you lend money to your corner store, it's in less good shape because who knows if they'll be able to pay you. So a junk bond is simply a bond backed by something that's marginal. I may not have the number exactly correct, but it's close. The junk bond market in the US, the number of people borrowing money who are of questionable credit quality, the junk bond market in the US is now enormous. That in itself is not good. Too many marginal people is not good. 25% of the junk bond in the entire US is oil related. Oil dropping from $80 a barrel to $20 a barrel puts enormous pressure in the junk bond market. So the Fed, wanting to prevent a forest fire, said, that's okay, we'll buy it all. We'll just buy all of the junk bonds in the United States, no sweat, and we'll just print a few $1 trillion to do it. Okay, I think this is nuts, but they're terrified of that forest fire. This is another example of what's going on. So you have this tremendous deflationary force. All of these junk bonds are in danger of going broke, which would mean lots of bankruptcies, right? I mean, everybody's defaulting on their loans and all of that. But you have this enormous pressure the other way. The Fed is saying, we'll just buy everything. Don't worry, we have a printing press. Just a month ago, the Fed basically said on the record, we have an infinite supply of money. Our balance sheet, the amount of money we can print, this is what they said, our balance sheet is unlimited. Okay, I guess my junk bonds are good. Like I said before about the fact that all the derivatives are leveraged 53 to 1, what could go wrong? A lot. Can I predict? Doctors work with patients, and sometimes the doctor will say, oh, he's got 2 months to live. And 2 years later, he's still hanging around. So this is not quite the science like a physics experiment, okay? But to give you a feel. So I think oil is really a minor part of this picture at this point. Is it irrelevant? No. So it's a fair question. But that thinking about oil is from 15 years ago. It's much less relevant today than it was. Now, I've been taking all these chat questions. Let me see if an actual live person wants to ask a question. Anybody want to raise a hand? If not, I'll go back to the chat. This is okay. We have motionless people there. I'll go back to the chat. I heard it was not just China, but some other countries along with it attempting to get the US no longer the reserve currency. Yes, that's another hangnail. It's not going to happen. If it happens, it'll be a really long time from now. It's a fair question, but it's just not especially relevant. The only place that's close is China, and they're not close. Euro as a reserve currency is never going to happen. When the euro was, I'm amazed the euro has lasted as long as it has. As soon as the euro was created, I went to Karen, my wife Karen, and I said, honey, I can't believe this. Any monetary union that has both Germany and Italy in it is nuts. If you know anything about Europe, the Germans and Italians couldn't be more different as people. How they're going to agree on fiscal policy. The Germans got wiped out in World War II. They're very careful. And for the Italians, every weekend is a big party. So they just print like crazy. So how they're supposed to be part of the same currency, I don't know. But for me to put my life savings into euros, forget it. So I don't think the euro is ever going to be the world's reserve currency. It's just not going to happen. China, maybe. But again, the question of reserve currency and oil, I don't think that's really where we're at right now. Again, those things are not irrelevant, but it's not the focus. There's things going on much more serious. The debt, 0% interest rates. Do you know that at one point, again, I think I have the number right, but I'm not certain. Government bonds are like treasury bonds. That's our bond. In Germany, there's called Bunds, B-U-N-D. The Bundesbank, the German central bank, they're called Bunds. In Britain, they're called something else, but they're government bonds. So a treasury bond is the US government borrowing money. Sovereign debt. It's sovereign because sovereign means country. So Germany has debt, France has debt, everybody has their own debt. I haven't checked lately, but last year, 20% of the sovereign debt in the world was at negative interest rates. What that means is when you buy, if the US Treasury bonds were at negative interest rates, you put in $1,000 into Treasury bonds, they don't pay you interest. That bond is worth $995. And the month after, it's worth $990. It's negative interest. You're paying them to hold your money. Now you think, this is nuts. Who would do that? Exactly. This is nuts. 25% of the world's sovereign debt was at negative interest rates. I think if things continue to get bad in this country, we're going to see US Treasuries at negative interest rates. It's insane. But this is the lengths to which the Fed going to try and prevent the forest fire from burning. Those kinds of things, to me, the junk bond market going broke, these are much more important than is the US going to continue to be the world's reserve currency for now. Someday that's a fair question. We'll see what happens. But these other things, to me right now, are much more serious. All right, let me look at other questions.
Good question.
Yes.
Yeah. You keep talking about, them not letting the forest fire burn.
Right.
At that point, what would be the consequences if they just decided, well, maybe we should let all this old undergrowth burn out anyway?
Well, that's an excellent question.
To recover from that, and what really would be the consequences?
That's an excellent question. If they did that, we'd probably have a recession significantly worse than 1930. Here's the problem. See, if you wait long enough, now you have a problem. There was it's a little gruesome is not the right word. It's a little difficult, but you'll see what I mean, and it's a good image. There were a bunch of people working on a hot air balloon, 5 guys working on a hot air balloon, those big balloons with the heat and then the balloon goes up. They were working on it and it loosed its tethers. It got loose. And they were all startled and they all grabbed it and it started to go up. 2 of the guys let go immediately, dropped 3 feet, nothing happened. One of the guys was scared and he held on 3 feet and it looked like he hurt his leg. Another guy was really scared. He held on for like 20 feet. He wound up in the hospital. The last guy held on for 40 feet and he died. We've been holding on too long. At this point, the balloon is so high. Now, if the Fed lets things burn, I don't know what's going to happen. The debt load is so enormous, I think half the planet goes broke. So what you need to do is you need to let go early. This is why I was saying in 2000, I was putting money in to help the patient. But then you got to take him off the stuff before he gets hooked on drugs. Take him off the painkiller. They never did. So we had the bubble in 2000. Then we had the crash in 2002. And they said, hey, it kind of worked last time. Let's give him more adrenaline. So they shot even more into him. I'm even okay with that, but get him off the drugs once things start. But they never did because the politicians love that stuff. Everybody's partying. You just hope by the time the music stops, you're out of office.
I know Swamiji used to always talk about a coming economic downturn that was going to be even worse than the 30s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let me share a little story. I mean, it's a little personal, but there's a point at the end. It's about Swami. We all have our own karma. For some years, many years, decades, I'd be in some small group gathering, something or other. And Swami would talk about how the financial world is about to end and, all of this. And then he would turn around and he'd look right at me and say, what do you think, David? And I was always caught because all my financial analysis said, nothing's happening. I mean, we'll have a recession, big deal. But I knew where he was at. So I'd say, well, sir, look, what do I know? But from my analysis, I've been studying this. From my analysis, it really doesn't look like anything severe is on. And he'd sort of harumph at me. He'd go, huh, and change his okay, fine. Sure enough, 6 months later, I'm in a gathering with Swami. He knows damn well what I think. I'm in a gathering with Swami. He turns around, he talks about the end of the world, and he looks at me and says, what do you think, David? So I said, look, sir, what can I cut? This went on for decades. Shortly before he passed away. And I'll share personally, if I may, for a moment, just for the devotees here. It's sort of one time this happened, and I got the cosmic joke. He was just trying to hook me. And I looked right at him, and I said, sir, you're just baiting me, aren't you? And he grinned at me, and he changed the subject. 5 minutes later, he started talking about the world economy failing. He turned and looked back at me again and said, like this. And I said, you're baiting me again, aren't you? And he smiled and turned away. He never did it again. It was for me to just get the point and more important than facts. And I just felt clean with the whole topic. I wasn't tense about it. I could say what I said, and he dropped it. Okay, so that all said, shortly before he passed away, I wrote to him and I said, sir, I just want you to know that for the first time in my adult life, I think that what you've predicting from my analysis, at least, is absolutely possible. And he wrote back one sentence. I was almost surprised. He wrote back and just said, he was never rooting for it.
I missed what,
Your voice cut out. What was the one sentence?
yeah,
The
what
one
was,
sentence was, no.
Oh,
the,
okay.
the one sentence was, let's hope not. See, he was never rooting for it. But he said, look, what can I tell you? Master put this out with such strength. I just want everyone to be on guard. For the first time in my life, I think it is realistically possible. The image I mentioned very briefly before, as far as I'm concerned, the financial room is filled with gunpowder. Someday somebody's going to drop a match. See, before I saw a tiny bit of gunpowder, and Swami was warning me the room's going to blow up. And I thought, Swami, there's only 6 grams of gunpowder in there. How bad can it be? Now the room is filled with gunpowder. Does that mean it's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. Realistic to think that we're going to have something very serious. That seems fair to me. Can I be sure? No. They're printing like crazy. Maybe they're going to get away with it. Again, I'm back to the physics experiment. This has never been done before. I can't be certain it's not going to work. I doubt it, but I wouldn't be flabbergasted. Maybe I'd be flabbergasted, but I can't be certain.
So if someone does drop the match, your prediction is that it'll be worse than the 1930 situation.
Not necessarily. Well, in a different way, though, because they'll print trillions of dollars. We won't have what we had in the 30s. We might have what they're having in Venezuela, maybe. In Venezuela, a loaf of bread now costs $5,000.
that's what happened in Germany before
Exactly.
the 20s and the 30s before
Exactly. They printed like crazy. See, in the 30s, we didn't print, so everyone had no money. In Germany, in the 30s, everyone had lots of money. It just wasn't worth anything. So which way are we going to break? I don't know. Is it even going to happen? I can't be sure. But I don't like the way it smells. As far as I'm concerned, COVID was the match. Now we're starting the fire. Is it going to get completely out of hand? Probably. But, they've changed the laws of physics on me. What can I tell you? But I'm trying to give a good picture of what's going on. In terms of individuals, I would go either way. If we have a lot of inflation, you want to own a lot of stuff and you frankly want to have a lot of debt. If you borrow $10,000 and we have a ton of inflation, next year you can pay the $10,000 off. It's no sweat. Everybody has tons of money. It's just not worth anything. If we have deflation, you have to be very careful with your money. So it's a little hard for me to predict. For those of you who have assets, I'd say do a little of a bunch of things. Have a little stocks, have some appropriate for people with funds. If you have a decent amount of savings, it's appropriate to have 10% of your money in gold in some form, because it's very hard to say what's going to happen. Generally speaking, I think being light on your feet is best. Don't make a lot of big financial commitments right now because it's all goofy and I don't know what's going to happen. Okay, let me go back to some of these written in questions. There's a Fed to decide what they're going to do next. The meeting is irrelevant. There's nothing they can do. So yes, there's an FOMC, Fed Open Market Committee, it's called. What are they going to do? I promise you they're not going to raise interest rates tomorrow. That's the place where they raise rates. I think the meeting tomorrow is pretty irrelevant. Financial markets tend to move a lot when that happens, but it doesn't mean anything because their hands are tied for now. Why does the government allow quantitative easing when recent history shows it weakens our economy? Well, because they're afraid of that forest fire. What do you want them to do? If they hadn't done this CARES Act, these stimulus bills, half the businesses in the United States would now be bankrupt. So I don't know what the guy who's been holding on to that hot air balloon, who's now at 40 feet, what should he do? There's no good answer. You go to your doctor, you've been smoking 3 packs a day for 35 years. You go to and you have emphysema and lung cancer. And you say, what should I do? What do you want him to tell you? What you should do is not smoke for the last 30 years. That's what you should do. So if anyone in here figures out how to create a time machine, I'm going to go to Washington and they're going to get a piece of my mind. But other than that, I don't know what to tell them. So what are they supposed to do now? Why are they doing the quantitative easing? Because the alternative is 1930. and they're terrified. So, they're here. The answer is to let go of the hot air balloon at 2 feet and not at 40 feet. But once you've held on that long, I don't know. It's funny. There were a couple of times when I would turn around and look at Karen and say, I'm going to go to Washington. I can't stand it. They need to. Now all I say to Karen is, thank God I'm not there, because I wouldn't know what to do. I don't know there's a solution to this stuff. Who makes the decisions for the Fed? There's a chairman. There's regional banks. There's 12 regional banks that get a vote. New York, Philadelphia, Kansas City, Boston. Don't make me name them all. They're regional banks that get a vote, but the chairman's the top dog. And they argue behind closed doors, but it doesn't really matter because most of this stuff is out of their hands at this point. The Treasury has a little more sway now. It's the Treasury and the government that did the CARES Act, printed the trillions of quantitative easing, and they're working together. There's no good answer. They've got to print trillions because the solution is worse than the 30s. Terrible. I don't know what they're supposed to do. How did countries get out of the Depression? Whether the U.S. or other nations? Well, we got out of the Depression in part.
You skipped a question, David.
Sorry. Well, I'll skip it and then I'll go back.
Okay.
We got out of the Depression in part because of World War II. World War II created so much demand. Everybody went back to work because we had a war to fight, and we wound up with a ton of debt. Work here because now we're not fighting deflation. It's a different thing. But someone asked the question. That's how we got out of it then. Personally, I think it was probably more on account of World War II than it was on what Theodore Roosevelt did. What Roosevelt did also helped. But between what Roosevelt did and World War II, that basically got us out of the Depression. The other question, some say that the virus and lockdown were all orchestrated to create the financial situation. Do you have an opinion? Forgive me, that is complete baloney. There are all these conspiracy theories about, this and that, and Kennedy is not really dead, and I don't know, Elvis is still alive.
Okay, what about
They
Elvis?
found a pizza in Kansas City or something.
Restless?
I have no cotton for that stuff. I don't buy any of it. I can't find, if someone has a conspiracy theory and they can really evidence for it, I'm a scientist, I'm a financial scientist, give me evidence for it. But people's evidence for that sort of thing is so incredibly thin, I have no cotton for it. It just doesn't, it doesn't make sense. Everybody knew we were going to have a pandemic someday. So what's the deal? The lockdown, I think it was way over the top. At first, we didn't know. In 9/11, when that happened, when 9/11 happened, we didn't. Is that the first wave of 25 consecutive attacks? Was this sponsored by Russia and they're declaring war? We didn't know what was going on. So we shut down all the airports in the United States. Made perfect sense to me because we didn't know. We've had the data on COVID for a long time. We know that the huge majority of people who are seriously affected are elderly and with pre-existing conditions. I'll give you a number. Santa Clara County, where I am, Mountain View, we got 2 million people here. 2 million. We've had 150 deaths from COVID out of 2 million. Do you know how many of those people died who weren't either elderly or with a pre-existing condition? Leaving those aside, out of 2 million people, 10. We've bankrupted half the county to save 10 people. You want to save 10 people, cut the speed limit to 50 miles, 50,000 people a year. So I do agree that the shutdown, financially speaking, is creating much more pain than it would have caused to not do it. At the beginning, it made sense because we didn't know. Now we have all the data. In Italy, which was a disaster, something like 97% of the deaths were elderly or people in nursing homes. And they bankrupted the whole country. So I agree with that, but was it created by someone to create the lock? That's crazy. Why would you do that? There are a lot better ways. Anyway, my opinion. I'm no expert in that field, but this is how it has occurred to me.
Maybe it was Elvis trying to take over the Federal Reserve.
I'm sorry?
Maybe it was Elvis trying to take over the
Federal Reserve. It was
Reserve.
Elvis taking over the Federal Reserve. It's very possible. They say that China has purchased large amount of U.S. debt. That is true. They also say the U.S. added a lot to payment. given that they're a financial rival, what is our future in the growth of China? Look, these things happen. It is very rare for the preeminent country in the world to last as the preeminent country, not as a country, but to be the top dog for more than 200 years or 300 years. Okay, we're there. Is China going to be the new world power? Very possibly. Happened to Britain. Britain was the top dog in the world. They lost it, right? Holland was, Italy was, France was. I mean, yeah, sure, we won't be the top dog at some point, so get over it. Huh. I mean, you know, will it hurt the US? In some ways, yes. So what do you have against the people in other countries? They're entitled to be top dog for a while. You know, before I moved to Ananda, I was a stockbroker back in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia had a big naval shipyard. And I remember the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer, the local big newspaper like the San Jose Mercury News, the front page, loses naval contract to Newport News, Virginia. Big news. And it came out and I looked at the headline and I said to Karen, that's okay. They're nice people in Virginia. They're entitled to to win a contract. So if the US isn't top dog, somebody else will be top dog. They're entitled. So I think it is true. I think it's true. Look, at some point, you know, China will take over. There are advantages to dictatorships. They mandated up structure and technology. And if you didn't do it, they killed you. Now, I would never want to live in China, but that's very efficient. So man, you go to China now, you know, people think of China as making little plastic junk and stuff. You go to China now, it's like the 27th century. Nobody carries money. Everything is, you know, incredible roads and high-speed rail and all this stuff. It's amazing. You don't touch elevator buttons. You talk to them. They get you to your floor. They are incredibly advanced. Will they eventually dethrone the US? Probably. Maybe. Depends how bad the next recession is, too, because they have a terrible debt structure also. And they're not as innovative as we are. Dictatorships tend to crush innovation. Now, let me I'll go back to questions. Oh, good. I'm not seeing any right now. Now, let's bring this all home a little bit as devotees. Look, I've been describing the financial world. This is how it looks to me. This is what's going on. We're here to find God. That's what we're doing here. The difficulties that come are because we need to learn something. We're on the cusp between Kali Yuga and Dwapara Yuga. You guys made the choice to incarnate right now. Your soul on some level decided this, okay? Deal with it. It is entirely appropriate for us to do the best we can in the world. Master said, have faith in God, but lock your car door. So our job is to be fiscally responsible in all the different ways that we've been talking about. That's entirely appropriate. But at the same time, really don't worry about it. You know, this is one little lifetime in this long string that we have. We don't know how things are going to turn out. Keep as positive an attitude as possible. Do the best you can. Try and keep God in your heart. That's really your best protection. That is not an excuse for being irresponsible. I think we're on a material plane. It's entirely appropriate to deal with financial issues and money issues. You know, over the years, I've done some amount of financial counseling. Somebody came to me some years ago. I'll never forget the story. It was a woman who had inherited some money, not a huge chunk. Let's say, you know, $80,000 or something. Not enough to retire for life, but a good amount of money. And we were talking and, you know, what should I do with it and all this stuff. And finally, she said, you know, I hate dealing with money. And a lot of people are that way. A lot of us are reincarnated monks and nuns and renunciates, and money's like, ugh, who wants to deal with money? So I said to her, she said, I hate dealing with money. I said, don't worry in that case. Don't worry. Soon your problem will be solved. And sure enough, a year later, she was broke. If you really hate dealing with money, don't worry. You'll never have any to deal with. I'm not sure that's the right attitude. We're supposed to graduate out of this planet. You can't fail out of this planet. We're supposed to graduate out, which means getting your material plane to work in a reasonable way. Doesn't mean rich. Loving God doesn't mean you'll be healthy, but to not have issues with it. If you reject something, you have just as much karma. You love it too much. It's just stuff. Yogananda said conditions are neutral. Conditions are neutral. The world is just doing its thing. Our response to conditions is not always neutral. And that applies just as much to money as anything else. Get there as much as possible, get clear, go inside, and then do your responsibilities. Take care of your financial world as best as possible. It's entirely appropriate. That is not taking care of it. Does that seem fair and make sense to people? See, this is the disadvantage of Zoom. I do speaking around the country, and I'll say something on Zoom, I'll try and say something funny, and it's just like stone silence, and everybody's looking at me, and I can't tell. Hey, good, Ramurti grinned, at least I can see that one. But anyway, so, all right, so let's again, I'll pause for a minute. We have some time left. I'll pause for a minute for comments or anything like that. I'm also looking at the chat board again, if you prefer that way, but how we doing?
So you left things repeatedly at a point where there was no good news, where I don't know what's going to happen, but it won't be good. So that was for the economy. You were looking at our country's economy, maybe the world's economy. So what does an individual take away from that when they're trying to decide about their own future? What kind of things should we be cautious about or be eager for?
Very good question. I did say my general sense, and again, I don't usually have to hedge things this much, but everything is so screwbally, it's hard for me to say anything with real confidence. As soon as I say it, I have 12 yeah buts in my head, so, but generally speaking, I did mention before, stay light on your feet. Don't make major financial commitments. For example, suppose you have this thought, hey, one way to do well with all of this, I'll buy it if you have money. If you have no money, do the best you can. But if you have some assets, I'll buy a piece of property and I can rent it out. I wouldn't do that because now you have the property. What if you can't rent it? What if people wind up living in there and they can't pay you rent? How are you going to sell your property? See, you got tied down. So I'm just asking people in general, stay a little light on your feet. Financial commitments, because everything could change a week from now. And if you've made a major commitment, you can't, you're not very flexible.
So buying a place to live in yourself might be more in line with where we are.
Maybe. Even that's risky. I mean, if you have a bunch of money, enough to buy a place and put down a down payment, what happens if you can't pay the mortgage? What do you do if you put too much in and now you can't buy food? You can't eat your... I mean, there is something to be said about, Master always said, get a place in the country, grow your own food. Most people can't really do that. I mean, if you're farmers, if I'm speaking to a group of farmers and you really can buy a place and grow your own food and hunker down, that's reasonable. But for people who can't, if you're going to put a chunk of money into a house, that's also tied down a little bit. What if your area has a lot of unrest and you want to move? Now what do you do? Can't sell the house. People are saying, is housing going to go up in value? Very possibly, but it's hard to say. Housing depends on a liquid financial system. If the banks freeze up, you won't be able to get a mortgage. Housing prices will drop. Is that going to happen? I don't know.
So when you say
my general comment is stay light on your feet.
So when you say light on your feet, does that equate with staying very liquid?
And don't make major commitments, because a commitment you make today, you could regret a month from now, and they're going to be difficult to get out of. That's really what I'm looking at. If you put a chunk of money into a long-term, a 4-year CD to get a slightly bigger interest rate, and we have 20% inflation next year, by the time you get your CD money back, it's not going to be worth anything.
So the same thing could apply to, because I've had this similar thought about, I was talking to somebody and I kind of said the similar thing to him. I said, I don't think it's a smart idea to start, he wants to start buying up houses. And I just said, I don't think it's a smart idea. And he disagreed. And I said, okay.
Fine. So
And-
you know, you're rolling the dice. I mean, can I tell you it won't work for him? No, of course not. I don't know.
And
But-
then the other
and-
thought you brought up was, and I agree with this, is he's already went through this one time where he had a bunch of homes and he lost them on the 2008 meltdown. And he was in that situation where he had like 22 homes. 18 of the 22 homes had people in them that lost their jobs,
right.
and
So,
couldn't pay.
right.
Now the situation we're in now, at least here in Oregon, when this thing happened, the shutdown happened. The governor, within days, declared you can't. She put a freeze on landlords or mortgagors trying to do anything. It's because people haven't paid rent and mortgages here in
Yeah.
months.
So let me just interrupt for a minute. So I don't know that what's going to happen, because people always fight the last war. I don't know that what happened to housing then is going to happen again. It's hard to say. But what I'm suggesting is, and this is a little bit personal, my take, you know, we all have our own feelings as well. I like being liquid. I like having a little, I can sort of adapt. If the world goes to the left, I can zig to the left. If the world goes to the right, I can zig to the right. You buy 22 houses, you're committed. And if things change, I don't know. So I kind of like, as I said, being light on my feet and being a little liquid, because then I can see how things are unfolding and see what happens. Someone did send in a question. Am I comfortable giving personal contact information so I can financial advice? No, for two reasons, and please forgive me. One is it's illegal, and having never run afoul of SEC laws, I'm not interested in starting now. And the second is, it's a little awkward for me to be that involved with an individual, because if I make a recommendation to you, and then 3 months from now, things change, am I supposed to call you back? Am I supposed to track that? I mean, it's for me to leave all these threads all over the place, honestly. And so my apologies. And it's hard for me to ever it's very hard for me to ever turn down a request for service. But that's when I really can't do that. What I'll say to you, if you have assets, if you don't have assets, you don't need my financial advice as much. But if you have assets, spread them out. Have 10% in gold, you know, a little bit in the stock market, kind of spread it out. That's kind of your best bet. That would be what I would say. But it's a little too awkward for me to give tailored individual financial advice.
Why would it be illegal for you to do that, though?
Well, technically, it's not illegal if I don't charge people for it.
Oh,
But if I charge people for it, actually, you go to jail for that stuff.
like insider trading, or
No, it's not insider trading, but you have to have a license. That's why I had two different
Not
securities licenses.
you're not licensed?
No, it's like a doctor. If you're giving medical advice, doctor. If you're doing law, you're supposed to have a lawyer. You need to have a financial license, which I don't have.
Oh, okay.
Technically, I'm copping out slightly, because if I do it for free, I don't need the license. But the idea is still there. It's not really the right thing for me to be doing at this point. And then I really feel a karmic thread to people. You know, if I tell you something specific, am I supposed to call you a year from now? Am I supposed to write it down? It's just too awkward. And it'll play on me. Oh, there's this guy, I told him to do X, and now he needs to do the opposite of X. What do I do? I mean, I don't even remember who it was. So it's a little uncomfortable. Anyway.
The next question keeps coming to my mind is,
Sure.
you've said a few times now about how each recovery takes longer and longer and longer. And obviously now the thing that's happened now has never happened before. And what is I agree things are changing, sometimes within hours, but
Right.
just as a personal opinion, I guess.
Right. So what's the question?
The question is, how long do you think this recovery is going to take?
No, I didn't say the recoveries are taking longer. What I said, each recovery has been weaker than the one
weaker.
before.
Okay.
Each recovery in 2003 was kind of weak relative to what we were used to. The one in 2009 to 2019 was even weaker. So each one's been weaker because the patient is closer to death and it takes more shots of adrenaline. So
Okay.
The recovery we're going to have even from this, I expect, is going to be pretty weak. Now, even that needs a caveat. If they print $50 trillion, I don't know. So we're in waters that have never been, that no one's ever been in. Print enough money, we'll have a nominal recovery. Everyone will be a millionaire. Of course, it'll cost $1 million to buy a loaf of bread, but you'll be a millionaire. You've always wanted to be a millionaire. You may soon get your wish. Someone just posted 10% in gold coins or gold funds. Kind of hard to say. There are gold funds and things that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Those are probably good until really, really ugly. Then they may go bad. So for the time being, those things are probably pretty safe. But at some point, you may want to have some physical gold. Hard to say. An ounce of gold, if it's worth too much, I mean, you want little tiny coins, because if an ounce of gold is $8,000 and you want to buy a loaf of bread, you have to break your coin into 15 pieces or something. It all gets complicated and tricky. Being, I'd say there's not much difference. I would avoid numismatic coins. I would avoid coins where the value of the coin is it's a rare coin. That is adding a whole new feature to it that's complicated. Just have little physical pieces of gold, or New York Stock Exchange equivalent is what I was saying. Any other questions about anything we haven't touched on, or about what I was talking about, the cusp between Kali and Dwapara, all that kind of thing? We're just on the cusp. These things are painful. They're generally painful.
I think the question that comes to my mind is, I think Master and Swami both were saying, especially Master, you don't know what's coming. I mean, do you think this is what he was talking about?
Well, it could. Well, as I said, when I wrote to Swami, is it this? I don't know. But when I wrote to Swami, I said, first time in my life, it seems very realistic to me that this is the beginning of that. Okay. Is it the beginning of that? I don't know. I mean, I think there's a good chance. I mean, the room is stocked with gunpowder. So I think, a match really could make a mess. Is this what Master was talking about? Is it going to be that bad? There's a reasonable chance, yes. Is it? I don't know. How can I know? We'll see how it plays out. Will the doctor pull out a miracle cure? Maybe. Maybe all this printing will do it. I kind of doubt it, but it's possible. So that's kind of where we are at this point. And all these years, I've resisted it. I told you the exchanges with Swami, sir, look, what can I tell you? I don't think so. If the Martians attack, maybe so. But everything I'm looking at indicates not yet. That changed in 2008. So now it could be.
And then the fact that we are in an ascending yuga,
right?
That things are, there's more light and consciousness that's coming in as
yes,
compared
but it's a very slow thing. See, we're really, when I use the word cusp, Dwapara Yuga started in approximately 1700.
Right.
These are very long. It's like turning a battleship. If you're in a little tiny boat and you want to turn, you just turn. If you want to turn a steamship, it takes 20 minutes to turn. Looking at hundreds of years here, and what's happening, part of the conflict that's happening is the old guard, like the people who were burning the looms, the old guard doesn't want to let go. They never want to let go. So the cusp is all about that dramatic tension. The old forms of churches are dying. The old forms of churches are dying. The Catholic Church is shrinking. That's Kali Yuga style church. Churches like Ananda are growing, that type churches. It's happening in technology. All the technology is changing. Look at what we're doing now. 25 years ago, what we're doing now would have seemed like a miracle.
Yeah.
So everything is changing, but the old guard doesn't want to let go. The guy who spent his whole life making arrows for the king for wartime had all these conspiracy theories about how gunpowder was invented by people trying to end the world. It's all those nasty creating problems by inventing gunpowder. But it's just the yugas are shifting. So we're in that shift, but it's very slow. So we're in the middle of it now. And usually the old guard and the new stuff fight. And it's hard. Master said the worst wars take place in Dwapara Yuga. Because in Dwapara Yuga, man has mastered energy. We know how the atom works. We know how Zoom works. We know how Wi-Fi works. We've mastered energy, but we're still incredibly immature. It's like if you give your machine gun to a 5-year-old, you're creating a problem. You've given him a lot of power, but he's only 5 years old. Well, we've now mastered energy, so we have an enormous amount of power, but we're 5 years old. Not a great combination. Good luck to us all. But we're here to find God. We incarnated now. Master did not make a mistake, and neither did your soul. We incarnated now because these are the experiences we're supposed to have. Quest to find God inside. So this is what we get. So don't hide under your bed. You hide under your bed, you're going to have to come back and go through it again. We need to graduate out of this planet, which means we face it with our arms wide open. Bring it on. Tell me what you want me to do. In my consciousness, not just physically. Tell me what you want me to do. I have faith in you. See me through. That's our job. And if it has to come in a fine. If it comes in a personal health crisis, fine. If it comes in a relationship area, fine. So this is the flavor now. It's a financial thing, and it'll probably touch everyone. But conditions are neutral. The world is just doing its thing. You can love it, you can hate it. But if you love it too much and hate it too much, it's karma. You'll be back. You get to do it again. I saw a great bumper sticker once. It said, born again and again and again and again. It can go on a long time. I encourage you. You know, Swami talked about when a very difficult thing happens, our tendency is to wait because the energy of the thing goes down over time. Time heals all wounds, right? You wait long enough and it's this old thing and now you can deal with it. What Swami said is don't do that. Get your energy up and meet it head on right now. Then you've overcome it. Waiting until it shrinks so much that it's puny, you haven't overcome much. I'll say the same thing right now. Face this full on. There could be lots of challenges. Hang in there, do the best you can. That's how you overcome karma. Shrinking and hiding under your bed doesn't overcome it. Then we just have to come back and do it again. Other questions or thoughts? We're just about there, but we got time for maybe one or two more.
Hi, David. Sorry, I don't have an image.
That's okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your personal interactions with Swamiji regarding his predictions. And I loved him and just thought he was so wise and knowledgeable. But I admit that over the years, he literally drove me nuts with these predictions of imminent demise. And after the first time I heard this 20 years ago during the .com bubble and burst, I just totally freaked out. And then nothing really bad happened. So I started to be more like you. I was like, all right, he's a very wise man, but there's something weird going on with his predictions about this imminent doom.
Well, Swami said he didn't know when it was going to happen. What he said was, look, Master put this out with so much force and so much energy, I felt obligated to relay it to all of you. But when I spoke to him privately, he said, look, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I can't just sit on this because, I mean, forgive me, he didn't use exactly what he said. But he said, I mean, Master put this out with such force, I just feel like I'm obligated to say it. But, so what can I tell you? I mean, in that little way, you were blessed it was only 20 years. For me, it was 40 I had to eat it, hearing him talk about this and knowing nothing was going to happen. So, you know, what can I say? But perhaps we're there at this point.
I always felt like he was just looking out for us and
yes,
trying to get us into community. So what difference does it really make?
No, it doesn't.
But I am getting the strong sense, as I see that you are, that this could be it. We don't know. I wish it wasn't. I'm not really looking forward to it, but
Right.
it is what it is. So thank you so much for your
Sure.
insights and knowledge. It really is broadened my understanding of what's going on.
That's what I was hoping for, just to give people sort of a picture of what's happening. And hopefully some of what I said is even correct. We'll see. As I said, it's a tricky time. So, we'll see how it goes. But that history, I think, is just sort of nice to get a feel for it. It's all about responding to the difficulties happening by printing money and goosing the economy. And each time it created a new bubble. And I think we're in a current one.
Thank you, David.
Oh, sure. Very good. Very good.
Thank you so much. It's been nice
Okay.
to spend this time with you and hear your views of all this. I'm sure it's enlightening for many of us who don't follow things nearly as closely as you do.
Yes, my pleasure. My pleasure to share it. Ramurthy, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I think we're good. We actually got through pretty much all the questions at the same time. So that's great. Good
Great.
timing.
I just want to tell everyone, many of you weren't with us at the beginning. I want to remind you at least of next week's talk at the same time. And it will be Dana Lynn Anderson, who is a fantastic artist and teacher of creativity and the creative process. It will be very different than this week's because she is going to show us how, when we're in times such as these, the development and use of creativity is a key factor in moving us into a much more positive future, a more noble new normal, and one that will give us the opportunity to express ourselves, the love we feel, the other emotions we have. So please join us a week from today, and it looks like we're probably going to go all the way through August with these sessions that are focused on what's happening in the future, why is what's happening now happening from a whole variety of different perspectives.
Ramurthy, can I put in just a little plug?
Absolutely.
Dana is a good friend. I have been a professional public speaker for 25 years now. She is tremendous as a presenter. I'm very careful with my praise. I took a whole weekend workshop with her. She's a terrific presenter. So if the topic is at all interesting to you, I am quite an outstanding job. So
Thank
I
you,
just wanted to
David.
put that plug in. Yeah, she really is a terrific speaker.
And for most of us, there will come a time when we're tired of looking at the numbers, and then Dana can help us know what to do next.
Right.
Thank you for
Thank you
joining
all.
us.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, David.
Good night.
Pleasure.